Hello everyone, welcome back. I want to welcome you to this new video that I'm going to make about realization of material advantage in chess, which I often feel is a very neglected topic because many times we're being told that once we reach a winning position or a material advantage, from there on it's just a matter of technique and you should just be able to do it without any troubles. This is not always necessarily the case. Sometimes we have some troubles realizing the advantage. Our opponent, if he's a good player, will usually not make us that comfortable winning the game. So in this video I want to present you a couple of tips and principles about realizing material advantage in chess. So this is a game that I've played a couple of years ago. So both of the players are relatively high rated, international masters, my opponent a Russian international master. And we reached this position after 19 moves. I had a very good opening preparation and I reached this position that you see in front of you. So if you will count, stop the video and count the material, you will see that white is actually an exchange up. But black has 2 pawns for it. Even though the pawn on c3, as you can see, is very weak and he is very likely to fall, so we can count it as an exchange up position for white. But still, matters are not so simple. First of all, the board is, as you can see, almost full of pieces. There are queens, there are knights, bishops, rooks, there is everything. So realizing the advantage wouldn't be so easy. Second thing is that you can see that position is quite unbalanced. This means that the pawn structure is white has a lot of weaknesses. The pieces are a bit scattered around. It would not be such an easy task normally, but I had a couple of general guidelines that helped me to win this game. So first of all, it's white to move in this position. How would you proceed here? You might stop the video and think about it. So I've played here the move queen to f2. It might look like a bit of a strange move, but the queen, while might seem active on h4, actually is not doing too much because both of its entry points to the black's position are covered by the black pieces. So this is also a chess rule in general of centralization. Strive to put your pieces in the center. The queen on d4 would be very strong. And this also suits 2 of the principles I'm going to speak about. So the first is try and avoid your opponent's potential counterplay. So for example, when we see such an advanced pawn on c3, aside of the fact that it's very advanced and it's inside white's territory, this pawn can potentially one day be a pass pawn if this pawn on c2 disappears. This pawn can also support some potential attacks if the black queen somehow reaches the square on d2, and so on. So first of all, we want to get rid of this pawn in order to avoid any potential counterplay on this side. And we also have the second principle, which is the don't rush principle. So in this position, instead of thinking how exactly to win the game straight away, to go for some checkmate attack, I didn't bother at all to do this. I just wanted to improve my position slowly and avoid my opponent's counterplay. So queen f2, I believe, is a good move. So black realized that the pawn on c3 is going to be under attack on the next move, so he anticipated it and played the move rook c8, defending the pawn on c3. I've continued with my plan of queen d4. You see that it's also a nice move because it's hitting the knight on h8 with the tempo. Now the queen is very nicely centralized on d4. Black played here the move king to g8, defending the knight. So you see that now the pawn on c3 is properly defended from black, 2 defenders, 2 attackers. So how would you proceed from this position once your queen got centralized? So there are actually a couple of options here, but I quite like the move I did in the game. So white played queen to b4, which is the third and perhaps one of the most important principles when realizing an advantage is striving for simplifications. This is something I guess many of you heard many times since they were beginners. When you have material advantage, try to exchange pieces, especially queens if you can, and this principle applies here very well. White is very happy to exchange queens. Black on his side does the right thing. He did not allow the exchanges. He played the move queen to c7. So the queen has to still protect the pawn on c3. And now, another interesting question. So we remember that the pawn on c3 is a very annoying pawn which is in our territory of the board, and we want to get rid of it. How can we do it as white? Once again, you might stop the video and think about it. So the move is rook to b1, and it's actually a very nice move because first of all white is developing the rook on a1, which is until this point did not participate in any active role in this game. It also hits the pawn on b7, as you can see, so black is forced to play the move b6. And now with this little maneuver, rook to b3, we can take care of the pawn on c3 rather easily. So you see that white is not in any hurry to realize his advantage. He's improving his position slowly, taking care of the pawn on c3. Black actually cannot defend the pawn on c3 properly. He played here the move queen d6, trying to save the pawn on c3, but I simply collected it with the move rook takes c3. Now in the next move, white would like maybe to exchange two pair of pieces, so black actually played a nice little trick here, rook to c5. I think that was a nice practical decision, because now if white will follow the principles blindly and think, okay, I want to exchange pieces, let me just do it, then black can suddenly take with the pawn on c5, hitting the queen, and in the next move the bishop on d3 would be stuck and white will lose his advantage. So this is also an important point. In chess we have general guidelines, we have principles that guide us to find the right moves, but we must never go for them or follow them blindly. Of course we need to examine every position as its own. So here we go back to the first principle of no rush, trying to improve your position slowly. The queen on b4 is not very well placed, so we get it back on the center, so queen d4 is a nice move. It's also nice that the queen is always eyeballing the square on g7, which kind of makes this knight on e8 pinned, because he must protect from the checkmate threat. Black played here the move queen to e7. So this is move number 26. White, I think, already achieved a couple of goals by taking the pawn on c3, activating his pieces. But now once again, let's go with the principle of thinking about our potential counterplay of the opponent. So let's suppose we are black here, and black is desperate for counterplay. We see that his knights are very badly placed on the edge of the board. Black is seeking counterplay. Where can his counterplay come from? So in the game I realized that since my king is still in the center of the board, black might think about making a move like knight f7, centralizing his knight and eventually pushing his pawn to e5 and trying to open up the e-file against my king. So I realized the e5 pawn break is a key move from black, which will make it much more difficult for me to realize my advantage. So let's think prophylactically. This means think about how can we avoid black's plans. And this is actually something that I also wanted to talk about. So when we realize our advantage, our material advantage, many times our thinking system should be very prophylactic. It's always trying to think about how can the opponent get back into the game, how can the opponent create problems for us, and trying to avoid these kind of opportunities. So you might stop and think here, because I think this is quite a critical moment. So if you managed to find here this a bit paradoxical move, knight g1, I congratulate you. That actually was a very difficult move for me to make and to find. It looks like a very strange move, getting the knight back into its initial position, but my point was actually to improve it into the f3 square, and from there it will have a greater control over the e5 square, which, as we remember from before, it's a very vital square. The move knight g1 also goes along well with the principle of no rush, so you see that white is ready to spend 2 tempos about improving his position just in order to avoid his opponent's counterplay. So black realized that he must react quickly before white manages to consolidate. I think black played a good practical decision here. He played the move e5 right away before my knight manages to reach the f3 square. I have to take with the pawn, because if I take with the queen, black will simply exchange queens and I will hang my rook. So pawn takes e5, and now black played knight c7. So black is actually, I think, played fairly well. He's trying to activate his pieces, mainly his passive knights, even in a price of 1 pawn. But now we see another hidden point of the move knight g1 actually, which is not only that it enabled us to maneuver our knight to f3, it also made a room for our bishop to retreat. And this means that we can go back to principle number 3 of simplification. So now white can exchange the rooks finally, because now after pawn takes e5, queen e3, the move c4 is not so scary anymore, because the bishop can just drop back to e2 or f1 as it wishes. So white managed in this way to get rid of a pair of rooks, which is, I think, a nice achievement for him. Black played here the move knight f7, hitting the pawn on e5. White played knight to f3, developing, it's funny to say developing a piece on move number 31, but it's true, and also simultaneously protecting the pawn. And now after knight e6, it's a good time to castle here for white. White didn't try to make the move castles before, because the pawn on h6 was under constant threats, but now once the queen is on e3, this move is possible. We also see that the rook is on a nice open file, so why not? Black played here the move bishop c6. Now we see that white kind of consolidated his advantage. He now possesses a full exchange up, but black is quite active and white should still be a bit careful. But now comes another factor of the position into fray, this advanced pawn on h6. You see that this pawn is quite a source of headache for black. His king is constantly weak because he cannot move to g7, and white is trying to take advantage of it. So this is also a chess principle in general, not only when realizing an advantage. You should always strive to improve your pieces and also improving your worst piece first. So who is the worst placed piece of white? Is actually the knight on f3, because now that the knight on e5 is safely defended, he has nothing to do on f3. I played here the move knight h2, seeking the f6 square, which, as you can see, is a very nice and juicy square for the knight. Black once again went for some complications. He played the move c4, the bishop dropped to e2, and then d4, trying to open up the bishop on c6. Once again, I think Black tried his best, no complaints for him. The queen dropped to f2, and Black even managed to pick up one pawn on e5, but for one very big prize, that now the f file is opened and White now has some serious attacking chances. But let's not forget about the principles we stated in the beginning. Remember principle number 3 of simplification. So the move here should be quite easy for you. Knight to g4, we seek more and more simplifications, also eliminating a defender of the black king. Black doesn't have too much choices. He took on g4, bishop takes knight, bishop d5 was played, and now once again principle of simplification, bishop takes knight on e6, bishop takes on e6, and queen takes on d4. So White in this position has already managed to exchange almost all of the pieces. If we compare this position with the starting position that we've seen, it's much more simple to win such a position with only queen and rook versus queen and bishop. We can also see that if this is not enough, the black king is also extremely exposed, and actually after the move bishop to f5, trying to block the f file, queen takes c4 check, Black actually resigned here because the material advantage of White is already overwhelming, and also his king is very likely to get under serious attack, so he didn't see any point of continuing this game. So let's try to draw some conclusions. Basically what we saw here, that White always, and this is first and foremost, always be aware of your opponent's counterplay. Try to see if you can avoid it, if you can make his potential counter chances more difficult to achieve. Strive for simplification always, especially exchanging active pieces as we saw. And rule number 3, principle number 3, don't rush, take your time, realize your advantage calmly. It's not always, I see many times people getting very excited about being in a winning position, so they want to end the game very quickly in some spectacular attack or something, and this many times just allows the opponent some unnecessary chances to get counterplay. So basically, be patient, be aware of your opponent's counterplay, and strive for simplification. These are the best guidelines that I can give you regarding realizing an advantage. So I hope you enjoyed this video and this example, and I will see you in the next videos. See ya. Bye bye.